Today I'm going to be working on another version of a really simple and sturdy pair of dividers that I called my shop class dividers. Hi, I'm Dennis Frechette and welcome back. Today I'm going to be modifying my design of the shop class dividers. The original video that I made was played around with the idea of making a shop class dividers and just having a little bit more style to it, but they were still uh, basically pretty ugly looking. They were better than the original shop class dividers, but they still needed a lot of help. And in one of the comments that I got with that video, I was reminded that this really looked like the pair of nautical dividers that I was working with a few years ago. In that video, I was playing around with making a pair of dividers that could be adjusted using only one hand. And in the process, I had to really change the proportions of the dividers, so they wound up looking pretty ugly as well. So for this video, I'm going to go back to that classic design and see if I can build something that looks a little better, but still functions well. So that's what I have for you today. If you haven't seen the original version of the shop class dividers or the videos that I did on the nautical dividers, I'll have those at the end of this video. Today I'm going to be making my dividers out of two pieces of 1/4 by 3/4 inch flat bar that are both 12 inches long. This is a pair of dividers that I forged several years ago, and by pure accident, I just really happened on the right proportions. I really like the look of these dividers, so that's what I'm going to be using as my standard for today. So what I've noticed about these dividers is that the legs are usually 3 to 4 times the length of the internal diameter of the loop at the top of the dividers. So today I'm going to try to make the curved section of these dividers to be roughly 3 inches. So that means that the legs that I'm going for are going to be between 10 and 12 inches long. And you'll see me going over to the vise periodically while I'm shaping this. I have a 3-inch mandrel in the vise that I'm using to check my measurements. And of course, you need to do the exact same thing for the other leg of the dividers. Now this curved section might seem extremely large, and I guess it is, but don't forget I need to put that floating locking mechanism in the center of this opening. So I need all the space there I can get. I'm hoping that if I have my theory right and I have the legs in the right proportion for this curved opening, it should all pull together. Here I'm laying out the offset that's going to make the transition for the legs, and the measurement that I'm using here is roughly 5.5 inches. Here I'm setting up the weld for the hardened steel tips that I'm going to need on these dividers. Here you need to pay close attention to how I have the dividers oriented, because I'm actually going to weld the hardened steel tip on the outside of the divider legs, not the inside. So you can see how the loop is facing down. It should be facing up. I'm still setting up the weld here, and I'm letting the flux harden till it's cold so that it hangs on to the hardened steel tip enough to let me get it into the fire. Here the pieces aren't quite at a full welding heat, but they're tacky enough to allow me to hammer them together to make sure that there is full contact along the entire surface. At this point, I've had the bar at a welding heat for several minutes, so I can just start gently hammering it into its final shape. And of course, you do the same thing to the other leg of the dividers, and yes, I did weld this one backwards as well. My mistake was that I forgot that the divider legs cross over each other, so the inside of the divider legs when they're assembled are actually the outside of the divider leg in a normal pair of dividers. So I will need to cut these legs off later and re-weld them in the correct orientation before I can use these to scribe metal. In the next couple of heats, I'm going to be working through the problem of how to forge this part of the job. Now, this is a detail where I would normally just go to the vise, lock it in place, and apply the hammer exactly where I need to get the shape where I want it. But a lot of you appreciate it when I try to demonstrate anvil solutions to these problems, so that's what I'm doing here. In this first heat, I've discovered that I was using a hammer that was way too heavy, so I was getting a lot of distortion that I needed to correct, and the shape still wasn't right. In this heat, the lighter hammer is correcting the distortion problem, but now I have a new problem, and I'm figuring out that the tongs that I'm using are way too light because I can't control the bar and hold it in position for hammering. The job is getting done, but there's still a lot of wasted effort here that I can eliminate. So for this heat, I'm just taking a totally different approach. I've decided to control the curved section of the bar by hanging a heavy pair of tongs on it. That's going to prevent it from following the bend back around on the anvil. And now all I need to do is just hammer the straight section back down to the anvil. Everything's under control. I'm able to concentrate my hammer blows where I want them, and I'm getting absolutely no distortion at all. So this method actually works better than putting it in the vise. So here's the new version of the process. I'm getting the shape I want very quickly, and there's very little wasted effort. Here I'm starting to work on the strap for the locking mechanism of the dividers. I'm using a 1/2 inch square bar. I'm going to be forging out the two ends a little thinner. They're going to wrap around the dividers. The thicker section in the middle is going to be cross-beamed out so that I have lots of material for the threaded wing nut that goes in there. Otherwise, the forging process is exactly the same as in the first video. So here I'm quite a bit further along. The locking collar is complete and in place. I've done all the surface grinding that I'm going to need. I've also put it through the fire to even out all the surface texture. And now I'm just doing the final stages of riveting everything together. In this video, I'm going to be forging a pretty simple pair of dividers that was commonly found in shop classes years ago. Hi, I'm Dennis Frechette and welcome back. Today I'm working on a project that was actually inspired by a video that I saw recently. The channel is called Can the Sheet Metal Dude, and his videos usually have Sheet Metal is Fun in the title. This video, he was making a transition from a square ductwork to a round ductwork, but he was using a pair of dividers that I had totally forgotten about. And we had them in our high school, and I always thought they were kind of neat looking and, very simple design and very elegant and, kind of thing I never would have thought of in a million years. But anyway, he was using one of these in his videos, and I thought, wow, what a flashback. So I watched. I was watching the video anyway, but I continued to watch, and around the 30-minute mark, he finally put these things down long enough so that I could have a really good look at them. So I have the link for that video in the description, so you can check it out. But that's what I have for you today. It's a prototype. I'm just playing around with the idea, and I'll probably tweak it a bit and do another version later on. But this is the start of the thought process, so hope you enjoy it. So what you're looking at here is a screenshot from the Sheet Metal is Fun video, and this is at the 31:31 mark. So like I say, he was kind enough to put these down long enough so I can look at them and study them. And the one thing that I really like about this design, I mean, as you can tell, there's nothing special about it. These are just stamped out by the millions, but the locking mechanism is really ingenious. Having the legs cross over like that, and then just a simple collar that rides up and down, depending on how the legs are positioned, and just locks it in place wherever they happen to be. That is a really usable idea, and I think it has a lot of potential, in a forged piece. So today I'm going to work with this idea and see what I come up with. To make these dividers, I'm going to be using a couple of pieces of 3/16 by 3/4 inch flat bar, and they're roughly 16 inches long. I think the cross section is pretty close to what he has in his video, and the length is just arbitrary. It's what I had around. I'm going to be starting at the top of each arm and working my way down. So this is the short little loop right at the top of the dividers where the pivot pin goes. I'm going to be making the curved part of these dividers a lot larger than the originals. The curved section is probably going to be at least half the overall length of the dividers. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want there to be an opening at the very top of the dividers, regardless of where the legs are set to. So even if the dividers are maxed out, I want there to be an opening right at the pivot point area at the top of the dividers that I can use to hang these things up. I noticed in the originals that this space was rather small to begin with, and it disappeared entirely long before you maxed out the dividers. So that for me is a problem for the way that I work. So I'm going to be changing the shape of the dividers quite a bit, even though I'm staying with the overall concept. Here I'm starting to shape the points on the dividers, and when you're hammering thin flat bar like this, you always close off the end of the shape right away. By creating a point here, you're establishing a pretty strong cross section, and that prevents the bar from buckling. So once you have that established, you can pretty much forge the bar the way you would anything else. Here I'm starting to forge the second half of the pair of dividers, so from here on in you're going to see me doing a lot of measuring and comparing with the first half that I made, which is now my pattern piece. The divider points on the original were shaped by creating a pretty sharp bend in the bar. Here I'm creating an offset, which is going to give a little bit more shape to that area and create a nicer transition. That's the nice thing about forging. These kind of details are so easily done, and they really make a big difference to the final look of the piece. Here I'm starting to work on the collar that's going to be locking the two legs together, and this is pure guesswork on my part. I took a divider setting that was oversized for the collar, and I'm going to be working to those measurements. Once the collar is done and it's on the dividers, I'll be able to better use the actual collar to estimate what the size should be. But for now, I'm just looking for something that I can work with. Here you can see I'm a little bit further along. I've spent a little bit of time cleaning up the legs. I have the holes drilled for the pivot pin, and the collar is complete with the set screw, so just basic drilling and tapping. I'm going to start by sliding on the collar because I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to be able to put the collar on after the legs are pinned together. I'm guessing with this design, if it's done right, the shape of the legs is going to prevent you from sliding that collar off, but we'll find out in a minute. Here I'm locking the set screw so I can use it as an extra pair of hands to keep everything lined up while I'm doing the riveting. And as always, I'm using a light hammer to start the rivet and to see how everything is going, and then I'll move to a heavier hammer to finish it up. So here's the finished piece. Overall, I'm very happy with it. It's a good start. The top half of the dividers turned out looking a lot larger than I had expected, but that's easily fixed. And I can get the collar off of these pair of dividers, but I think that's just because the collar right now is so oversized. Once I get that dialed in, I think that will no longer be the case. Hi, and welcome back. What I have here is a pair of dividers that I made several years ago. It was based on a photograph that I saw somewhere, and I really liked the design and the proportions, so I decided to make a pair. What interested me about this design was that the shape of the arms allows you to open and close the dividers with one hand, or at least that's the idea, but I didn't make this pair right, and they're very difficult to use. This is exactly how they were made in the photograph, so that's how I made them. But I have seen others since then, and this curved section at the top is quite a bit larger, and that should make it a lot easier to open and close. So that's what I'm going to try today. I'll make a pair with the top section quite a bit larger and see how that works out. The stock that I'm using today is just 3/8 round mild steel, and it's about 10 inches long. I estimated that the curved part of the leg on the original was just about 3 inches long, so I'm going to jump up to 5 inches here just to see how that changes the proportion of the thing. This is a pretty simple form of dividers to make, so the forging is fairly straightforward. However, it is like making a pair of tongs, and you do need two pieces that are identical for the thing to look right. So you do have to take your time and do the measuring and just make sure that everything's right before you go along. To shape the arms, I'm going to be putting the curve in the bar first, and then I'm going to flatten out the section after it's curved. I find that a little bit easier than flattening it and then trying to curve it. And then once the curved section is done, I'm just going to taper the ends to a fine point. And now that I have the two halves forged out, I'm ready to put them together. The thing I like most about these dividers is that there's no complicated hinge joint. The friction comes from the two arms rubbing against each other, so all I need is a very simple rivet here at the top, just enough to keep the two arms under tension. And the amount of spring tension that you set up in the arms is what makes the dividers easier or harder to adjust. The problem I had with the original set of dividers that I made was that the arms were so short and I left them so thick that there really wasn't any kind of spring in that curved section. So there was a tremendous amount of tension between the two arms, and it really takes a lot of force to get them to move. So this should solve the problem because the longer arms are going to tend to be more flexible. But I can tell you right now that I don't like the look of these ones. That curved section is way too large, so I'm probably going to hit some middle ground between what I have here and what I used originally. And that'll give me the best balance of performance and, the look that I'm after. The reason I did this video is because I get asked quite often what goes into, designing the work that goes into these videos. How do I figure it all out? And a lot of it is just pretty basic. You just go out in the shop and you try something. You see how it looks. You make a decision based on that. You try something else, and then down the line, I decide on a final product, and that's usually what you get to see. But this is the process that I use most often, just trial and error. That one was too small. This one's way too big. I'm going to hit something in the middle, and that's probably what I'm going to stay with. So the question you're probably asking yourself is, I've mentioned several times that I know this is going to be way too big and I'm not going to like it. So why are you finishing it? Well, it's because you do learn something every time you put something together. Again, I know this is too big, but it is a finished product. Now what I can do is I can start cutting the ends of these curved bars down and sort of scaling my way back to find out what I do like. I've got the shape of the dividers is totally done. All I got to do is cut back the arms and to get to a length that I feel is proportioned right and works right. So I'm actually saving myself a lot of work by overshooting, um, the mark that I thought I wanted. And because sometimes you're wrong, you think you're overshooting a mark, and you wind up that it's perfect, and you do like it after all. So occasionally that works out for you, but mainly this just gives me a way of playing around with a lot of different sizes of bars without having to totally reforge something from scratch. So again, that's part of the process as well. I'm sort of thinking ahead. Well, I can change this and alter it back until I see what I want. And of course, I'm going to be keeping track of what I'm cutting off so that I can estimate where I need to start on the next one that I want to make. And of course the hinge joint gets done pretty much the same way you do everything else. You rivet it tight, put it back in the fire to loosen it up, and then rivet and move the arms to sort of basically machine the two surfaces until they move freely. And here I'm setting the tension of the dividers by twisting the arms slightly so they rub against each other as they cross. And again, this is a very light duty set of dividers that I use to make some very quick comparative measurements at the anvil. So I don't need a lot of tension because I don't need to hold that setting for any length of time. I'm just comparing one part of the work with another and then they're set aside. So that's the behind the scenes video. I hope you like it. Next week I'll do the final version of this that's all cleaned up and ready to go in the toolbox. Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to do a bit more forging on the calipers that I started last week. I'm going to clean them up and see if I can turn them into something a little more presentable. In this case, the top section, the curved part, I think is way too large, and I think the legs should be longer. So if I make the legs longer, that's going to allow me to only remove a little bit off the top and make that part seem quite a bit smaller because the legs are longer. And I think that'll improve the function of the piece and give you the proportions that will make it look nice. Before I cut the calipers apart and reforge them, I'm going to make some changes that were suggested in the comment section of the last video, and that is to, instead of having a round section at the top, make it more elongated or pear-shaped and see how that affects the function of the piece. So a few seconds ago I measured the maximum opening of the calipers the way I have them now, and I just compared it to the top surface of my anvil. And now that I have the calipers altered, I'm going to take another measurement and see how much that measurement has changed. And I have to say that I was quite surprised at how little it affected the maximum opening of these dividers. I thought the straighter legs would have really cut down the amount that you were going to be able to open these dividers. So that was a good suggestion, and I never would have thought of that. I've never seen them made this way, and I don't know why, because they work really well. But I'm still looking for that classic divider shape that you see in old paintings and, that are brought up from archaeological salvage of shipwrecks and things like that. And they have that curved top with a nice slender leg. So we'll see how close we can get to that. So the first thing I did is I basically just cut off the hinge area. I just removed a little bit of material on each side of the rivet. There really wasn't very much because I'm thinking now that by lengthening the legs a little bit, I'll be able to keep the top section basically the same size that it is, just a little bit smaller. Longer legs will give it that proportion. So I'm just going to take a couple of heats and play around with that shape. So once I have the top the way I think I want it, I'm going to start working on the legs. And for this set of dividers, I'm going to totally finish forging the legs and see how that changes the look of the dividers. When I'm happy with them, I'll go ahead and rivet them. But by not riveting them right away, it gives me the option of cutting off a little bit more material if I feel I need to. But I'm going to assess that once the legs are totally done. The legs on this set of dividers are currently round. They are eventually going to have a triangular cross section. To get there, I need to start off by forging a square section through the entire length of the leg. I'm forging that square section at 45 degrees to the axis of the dividers. So that means that one corner of the leg is actually going to be fitting into the die to forge the triangular shape. So here I'm getting ready to forge that triangular cross section. I have one corner of the square section that I just forged lying into the 90-degree V block, and I'm using the cross peen of my hammer to flatten the backside of the square into a triangular shape. And of course I do the same thing to the other leg. And once I get the shape that I want, I'm ready to go ahead and rivet the whole thing together. Of course, the final fitting and adjusting is all done the same way I did in the first video. The only difference with this one is probably going to be that I'm going to spend a little bit more time with a file cleaning up the triangular forgings, for example, just to give them a sharper, crisper edge. So here's the final product. These two videos probably represent about 3 or 4 hours of experimenting in the forge, and I probably would have edited out all of the experimentation and just went straight to the final product that you see here.